was born by the roadside, somewhere in County Kildare.
I think it's all over. It is, and Kildare are the champions. Champions for the first time in 42 years.
And it's the red I will repair.
The Cora of Kildare.
Hello and welcome to Kildare Speaks with me, Fia Rua. We are on week 4. This is episode 4. Where are the weeks going? I want to thank everybody who's listened in the last few episodes. Keep sending the messages. Keep sending the comments in. Last week's episode featured Mario Corrigan. And I've got lots of lovely comments about that. Any information you need about individual podcasts, let me know. Just message me on the Facebook page, which is Kildare Speaks Podcasts, or you can go to the website, which is fiarua.com/podcasts, or email fiaruamusic@gmail.com. Again, I want to thank, as I do every week, I want to thank Kildare County Council, our sponsors for Kildare Speaks, without whom we would not be able to proceed with this podcast. So, Kildare Speaks is a podcast where we talk to individuals in the county of Kildare, or groups, and this week is no exception, where I will be talking to Linda Allen. And Linda Allen is a therapist and she's an author. She released a book in 2016, which we'll talk about in the interview. All of the interviews in the last few weeks, folks, has been done in real people meeting people as opposed to Zoom. And I hope to continue this practice, maintaining social distancing and all the rest of it. So basically what I'm saying is I go to their location or they go to my location within the county. We might have a few Zooms in the next few weeks because of just the practicalities of trying to meet up. But I went to Linda's location, which is in Johnstown, for this week's podcast. Linda practices out of Johnstown in her various therapeutic pursuits, dealing with mental health and other issues, which she'll talk about in the interview. She also practices out of Naas and Salins as well. So thanks for all the response over the last few weeks, and keep listening, keep spreading the word. And this is Linda Allen. You're listening to episode 4 of Kildare Speaks. So, Linda, how are you today?
I'm great, thanks. Glad to be here, Owen.
It's a wet day here in Johnstown, County Kildare.
It is indeed.
Has Johnstown been good to you? I hear you moved out here recently enough.
Yeah, absolutely great. Do you know, it's a surprise. I didn't realise how much was in Johnstown. I didn't realise what beautiful walks there are. And for the last few months, I've had a great time exploring all the lovely walks up around the country at the back of us here in Johnstown. Yeah,
it's amazing. Like sometimes I go out to visit people in Johnstown direction, and you only see that little, the little village. But then if you go behind the village again, and there's fields and fields, they look like old estates houses and big fields with horses in them and stuff. You could go on forever out that way, isn't it? Beautiful
old houses. Yeah. I'd say there's a lot of history actually in the area. Beautiful estates and lots of walled fields.
Sure. It's a new adventure when you move to a new part of Kildare, isn't it?
It is indeed, yeah. And I'm working my way around Kildare now at this point.
You were in Salins before that, is it?
I was in Salins for 5 years, and before that I was in Rathangan for 12 years.
Okay, so yeah. There's a good stretch of the county you've covered already.
Indeed, yes.
So Linda, in 2016 you wrote a book called See You in 2 Minutes Ma, and that was your first book, and there's a story behind it. Why did you write the book?
Yes, indeed. That book is unfortunately based on a tragedy, but that said, it was something that I wrote and feel has been very supportive to many, not just me, in dealing with what the tragedy was. So in 2012, my 15-year-old son left the house saying, "See you in 2 minutes, Ma," and closed the door, and I was expecting him back in 2 minutes to bring him to his dad's house. We were separated. And he didn't come back, and so that was the last time I saw him alive. And at the time he was being a 15-year-old full of hormones, full of moods, full of all those kinds of things, and he to me was presenting as a teenager who was experimenting with the world and had many friends who were always in our house. He loved music and he played drums. So what I was expecting from him was definitely not what happened.
So this is 2012, and I think what you're when you're talking about it, it's like when you're his mum and you don't expect it to happen. How has it made you aware that how do we watch out for people? How do we watch out for young people when their own mum is very unaware of what's going on.
Do you know? And in my case, Owen, that's even harder to accept. I've worked on myself quite a lot over the years, but I'm also a mother who worked in therapy with individuals or with groups of people. Personal development has always been my area.
Were you working in the therapy area before this happened in 2012?
Yes, but on a very small level. I was working with adults who were returning to education, and my subjects were personal development and self-assurance and confidence building and those kinds of things. And I was also working with children in care. So I was very aware of children who had very challenging needs. And so my own son's needs, maybe in comparison, didn't seem so great. He was well loved, he was well looked after. He had 2 parents. We were separated, but we lived very amicably with the separation. He had a small brother with his my ex-husband had another child, and he had an older sister who he got on fabulously with. Yeah. Now, they fought too, but...
We'll get on to the book in a second, but obviously the book is related to this subject, but what comes to my mind is, can people like your son do it spontaneously or come up with the idea spontaneously, or do you think it's always building up in some way?
That's a really interesting question. I'm not 100% sure. In his case, I do think that impulse is very prevalent in young teenagers. I think it can be down with something as simple as it's not simple when you're a teenager and your relationship with your girlfriend happens to fall apart, but he'd had an on-off relationship with a 16-year-old young person, and he was a little younger. There was another suicide in our area 6 months prior. It may have also affected his thought process. He was very angry with that young person. He didn't know him particularly well, but he was in his class. So Dara was between 2nd and 3rd year. His group of mates had 2 suicides in their year. I mean, that's phenomenal. That's phenomenal.
It's pretty impossible for that not to have some implication on his end.
Yeah.
So 2012, this happens, a bomb in your life, and did you have any urge before this happened to write, or was it just something that how did that happen? When was the first page?
It's interesting. The writing part was something I've done for years. I'm a journaler. I've written since I was 9. I write, really? Yes, and it's part of my support. It's how I manage my feelings. I put them out on paper, and they don't seem so intense. And actually,
I hope we're not branching off too much, but I'm curious about how do you discipline yourself to do that every day? Do you still do it every day?
Yeah, and it's not even a discipline; it's a choice. So maybe the writer's in me.
That's the wrong term. That's where I'm going wrong.
Yeah, it's something that I find is very, for me, it's sort of reassuring. And the interesting part for me now is that research says when you speak your emotions out on paper, it actually can take some of the levity of them. It becomes more logical because you're putting it out. Same as speaking out. Yeah. In fact, you write songs, so possibly that's how you do it.
I don't write them every day, And it can be therapeutic writing songs, but it depends. There's 2 types of songs. There's the songs that's about external stuff and songs about internal stuff. So, I think when you're writing in the journal style, it's very much internal. Mostly,
some people are afraid of that. Some people don't like to look inward too much, And because I had the habit of that, interestingly, after he died, I couldn't write a word. It took about 2 months before I could write anything. But I was not sleeping, as you can imagine. And I was sitting up in bed late one night, and I wrote down "See you in 2 minutes, Ma." And I just thought, gosh, if it wasn't such a tragic, story, I would find that like an interesting chapter. Yeah. And underneath it, I started to write, and it came out. It just felt like, oh my gosh, this is really flowing. This feels similar to my journal, but not quite the same.
And I think I'd imagine that once you just have that opening line or that opening page, it
started to flow.
Yeah, an avalanche then.
Yeah. And then I wrote and wrote and wrote, and then 2 years later I went back and picked up those journals and used them as the basis of my story.
Right. And so when you were writing your journals, you weren't necessarily planning a book at that point?
No.
Okay.
But what I found was that I have a great cohort of support. I've been blessed, and I'd say to anyone going through a difficult time, if you have support, let them support you. And I was able to let them. So my book is really interesting because I end up going off to Thailand on my own after being a parent of, I still am a parent, but I had such a different life then. I was in Thailand for 6 weeks with no responsibilities, and any parent will tell you, having nobody's laundry, nobody's lunches, nobody's moods, nothing. I suddenly found myself completely left with myself,
Liberated to a certain extent.
Liberated to a certain extent,
and
absolutely.
giving yourself some space maybe to contemplate everything that's happened.
Yeah, because I was bereft also. But it was the most fascinating thing to find myself on the other side of the world.
And why are you talking about Thailand? Is that where it started, the book?
No, I had started before, but I worked on it quite a lot then, and it gave me a focus.
Yeah.
The other thing was it gave me a focus. I felt like all the jobs I'd done, and my children used to laugh because I had part-time work, 2 part-time jobs, and they used to say, which bag do you need today, ma'am?
Yeah.
But it suddenly gave me a focus, because when I found myself with my older daughter moved out to live with her boyfriend's family, she said she just couldn't sleep in the house once he was gone.
Okay.
So she was around me, but she wasn't sleeping
What age
there.
was she when?
She was in second year in college, so she was 19.
Yeah. When, in 2012?
Yeah. And he was late 2012, and he was 15.
Yeah.
So I had a very busy house. Then it was nothing.
Yeah.
It was so quiet and sad, and so it was quiet.
Did you feel the presence of your son when you were writing it? Did you feel that you found yourself talking to him while you were writing it, or did you just need to switch off from that side of yourself and just get into the writing, or was it a bit of both?
A bit of both. But I found when for 2 years after he passed, I seemed to be very tuned into an idea of him that wasn't a physical idea. So I, for example, heard a song in my head, "See, Shine Bright Like a Diamond," and I still, if I hear that, I think it's him trying to tell me something. And I started to use those as ways to help me feel better, because I felt like, oh my gosh, he's still communicating with me. It was quite notable for about 2 years, and then it faded away, and then I found myself wishing it would happen more, looking for it more. But I still believe it exists, and he still does communicate that way, often through song, interestingly enough, given that you're a singer and
Songs
songwriter.
can be very powerful that way.
Yeah.
Something came to my mind, and it seems a bit weird to ask, but do you ever go to your son's grave? Does he have a grave?
He has a grave. I don't actually find the grave a place I can tolerate that much. I have been a little bit more in the last few years. Now he's 7 years gone. But actually, to me, the grave seems empty. It seems devoid of life. It seems like it's not a representation of him. I find the grave the most challenging. Yeah. And I only go when I really feel the call to go. And I know some people visit the grave every week and they speak with their loved one. Yeah. To me, I speak with them out in nature on the wind. I hear, I just have a different way of connecting with them.
Everyone has their own way of doing it. Yeah. I lost a friend. It was near enough. It was 10 years this year. A good friend, but I've never visited his grave, and I never wanted to. It never even entered my head to visit his grave. So it works for some people,
and it doesn't for others. And in fact, a number of people have said to me over the years that they're so glad I was so honest about that, because they felt they had permission not to go. Because there's almost an expectation in society that we behave
especially
in particular
within,
ways.
If the church is a big part of your life, you have the blessing of the graves and the different occasions throughout the year where you must attend. So it must have been very difficult for people who didn't find it a nice place to be.
Our challenge was we had left the Catholic Church. We were a separated couple, so we buried him without the church, which was a really interesting phenomenon.
How does that happen? You need. Go ahead. You take over.
No, what happened was, so he passed. He died. We found him, and it was horrific. And then myself and my ex-husband said, how are we going to do this? We didn't have him baptised, Now the local, can I just say, parish priest in Northanger was amazing. He came over to the house. He said we could do whatever. And I said, thank you, and I appreciate your services, but we're going to have to do something else because we've chosen a different way. So we sat around in my sitting room, and I remember an eclectic mix of people going, how are we going to send him off? And it was talk about community. I mean, Rathangan community came out of the woodwork. The Dara had been down. He's part of the youth club. They were decorating it that day for it was Christmas, so some Christmas activities, and they offered us the youth club, or the community centre as it was, and a number of people got together and they just lined it with candles. His lads, who he was practicing in the band with, said they'd play a song or two, but they didn't want to be seen. So we had a little curtain for them because they're afraid they'd cry if people could see them.
Yeah. And being nervous playing as well.
Really
I imagine,
nervous.
yeah.
And so then we had people come up and read poems. All of his friends wrote in a book that was in the